notes, which I will refer. And how I lecture the classes is not just for exam purposes, but also for knowledge base. So it's always something that you can go back to if you have questions, okay?
Yes, ma'am. I know your style. I had you for compliance, so I know.
All right, so let's start. Reputation, and what is reputation by definition? Let me see if I can direct you towards the page 10. I'll start from 10 and then I'll go back to page 3.
Okay, can you share your screen, please?
Oh, I don't have my screen. I've had
Oh,
copy.
okay, no problem. Okay.
So reputation is public information regarding a business's trustworthiness. A business reputation reflects the information that stakeholders have on how trustworthy its behavior has been in the past. So a corporate reputation is a collective representation of a firm's past actions and results. And that describes the company's ability to deliver outcomes to multiple stakeholders, and it gauges a firm's relative standing both internally within the company and externally. So any company's reputation, it derives from a mix of the rational and emotional attachments that stakeholders form with it. Unlike image, which is a more immediate external perception of an organization, and maybe one element of reputation. Reputation is built up over a longer period and is about the integrity of an organization. It is the result of a collection of memories, perceptions, and opinions influenced by every event, contact, public statement, media reference, rumor, or leak about that organization. It is as much about impressions, beliefs, and feelings as about experiences and knowledge. But perception strongly influences or can become reality. So a good reputation means that the business is perceived to match stakeholders' values, while a bad one means it is not. So you've done a lot of different risk areas. And so we're going to focus tonight on reputation risk, because reputation risk is not like credit risk. It's not like financial risk. As you can see, it's based on perception and an organization's response to things that happen within the organization and outside of the organization. So let's do the case study of Johnson & Johnson Tylenol crisis. That's back on the first page. Tylenol was the most successful over-the-counter product in the United States, with over 100 million users. Tylenol accounted for 13% of Johnson & Johnson's year-to-year sales growth, and 33% of the company's year-to-year profit growth. Tylenol was the absolute leader in the painkiller field, accounting for a 37% market share. So think about it. It was outselling the 4 leading painkillers: Anacin, Bayer, Bufferin, and Excedrin. Had Tylenol been a corporate entity by itself rather than just a brand, its profit would have been in the top half of the Fortune 500. So during the fall of 1982, a malevolent person or persons, presumably unknown, replaced the Tylenol extra strength capsules with cyanide lace capsules, resealed the packages, and deposited them on the shelves of at least half a dozen or so pharmacies and food stores in the Chicago area. The poison capsules were purchased. 7 unsuspecting people died a horrible death. Johnson & Johnson, the parent company of McNeil Consumer Products Company, which makes Tylenol, suddenly and with no warning, had to explain to the world why its trusted product was suddenly killing people. So the primary evidence. The assistant director for public relations at Johnson & Johnson recalls how the company reacted in the first days of the crisis. They said they got a call from a Chicago news reporter, and he told them that the medical examiner there had been given a press conference. People were dying from poison Tylenol, and he wanted their comment. As it was the first knowledge that the company had heard about it, they told him that we don't know nothing about it. In that first call, they learned more from the reporter than he did from them. So the Assistant Director of Public Relations dilemma points out something that has become more prevalent with the expansion of 24-hour electronic media. The media will often be the first on the scene. Thus, they have information about the crisis before the organization does. So Johnson & Johnson chairman reacted to the negative media coverage by forming a 7-member strategy team. And the team's strategy guidance from the chairman was, first, how do we protect the people? And second, how do we save this product? The company's first actions were to immediately alert customers across the nation via media, not to consume any type of Tylenol product. They told consumers not to resume using the product until the extent of the tampering could be determined. Johnson & Johnson, along with stopping the production and advertising of Tylenol, withdraw all Tylenol capsules from the store shelves in Chicago and the surrounding area. After finding 2 more contaminated bottles, Tylenol realized the vulnerability of the product and ordered a national withdrawal of every capsule. So by withdrawing all Tylenol, even though there was little chance of discovering more cyanide-laced tablets, Johnson & Johnson showed that they were not willing to take a risk with the public safety, even if it cost the company millions of dollars. The end result was the public viewing Tylenol as the unfortunate victim of a malicious crime. So you see how important it is to have a strategy in place when you're dealing with a reputation risk for a company. So Johnson & Johnson also used the media, both PR and paid advertising, to communicate their strategy during the crisis. Johnson & Johnson used the media to issue a national alert to tell the public not to use the Tylenol product. In the first week of the crisis, they established a 1-800 hotline for consumers to call. They used the 100 number to respond to inquiries from customers concerning safety of Tylenol. And they also established a toll-free line for news organizations to call and receive pre-taped daily messages with updated statements about the crisis. And this is how important a company's reputation is. Because don't forget now, when you're talking about the bottom line and how a company is making money, the reputation is key. If you don't have a good reputation, you're not going to have a high revenue because people are not going to be interested in your products. And you learn from this case of Johnson & Johnson what you need to do when there is a crisis and how you need to react and use the information that you obtain in order to try and build your reputation and protect your brand. So before the crisis, Johnson & Johnson had not actively sought press coverage, but as a company in crisis, they recognized the benefits of open communication and clearly disseminating the warnings to the public as well as the company's stand. And that builds a good reputation. Because people, again, even though the crisis happened, they still trust the company. So several major press conferences were held at corporate headquarters, and within hours, an internal video staff set up a live television feed via satellite to the New York metro area. This allowed all press conferences to go national. And of course, they went on 60 Minutes and the Donahue Show. Again, you're trying to regain that public trust. So Johnson & Johnson communicated their new triple safety seal packaging, because what the issue was what? Persons were able to open the bottles and change the capsules. So that means looking at the product itself, they had to do damage control, and they had to do something whereby the capsules would be safe. Otherwise, persons would not purchase it. A glued box, a plastic seal over the neck of the bottle, and a foil seal over the mouth of the bottle, with a press conference at the manufacturer's headquarters. Tylenol became the first product in the industry to use the new tamper-resistant packaging just 6 months after the crisis occurred. And timing is also important. The second evidence was the initial media reports focused on the deaths of American citizens from a trusted consumer product. In the beginning, the product tampering was not known. So the media made a very negative association with the brand name. The media was not only focused on the deaths, but it was also pervasive. So throughout the crisis, over 100,000 separate news stories ran in US newspapers and hundreds of hours of national and local television coverage. A post-crisis study by Johnson & Johnson said that over 90% of the American population had heard of the Chicago's death due to cyanide-laced Tylenol within the first week of the crisis. And now you see, in a space of 6 months, they were able to rebuild that trust in their products. One of the services claimed that this story had been given the widest US news coverage since the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Because don't forget now, if they didn't rebuild that trust very quickly, then other brands would be able to feel their reputation starting to slip away, because no one had a tamper-proof cover. So media reporting would continue to focus on Tylenol killing people until more information about what caused the deaths was made available. In most crises, media will focus on the sensational aspects of the crisis and then follow with the cause as they learn more about what happened. And you see that every day in the newspaper. It's all about sensationalism. So some scholars have come to recognize Johnson & Johnson's handling of the Tylenol crisis as the example for success when confronted with a threat to an organization's existence. The Tylenol crisis, said Burge, is without a doubt the most exemplary case ever known in the history of crisis communications. Any business executive who has ever stumbled into a public relations ambush ought to appreciate the way Johnson & Johnson responded to the Tylenol poisonings. They have effectively demonstrated how major business has to handle a disaster. And remember, when you're dealing with reputation, communication is key. Timing is key. Because all of those come together along with damage control to mitigate against further risk. Because once your reputation is gone, it's very difficult to get it back. So the Tylenol case was the basis for many of the crisis communication strategies developed by researchers over the last 20 years. And Berg's suffering strategy and Benoit's rectification strategies both were developed from doing case studies of how Johnson & Johnson handled the Tylenol poisonings. The crisis category in the Johnson & Johnson's Tylenol case is terrorism. Combs defines terrorism as intentional actions taken by external actors designed to harm the organization directly or indirectly. So Johnson & Johnson, in their crisis response strategy, they use different measures. They employed forgiveness and sympathy. Forgiveness strategy seeks to win forgiveness from the various public and create acceptance for the crisis. So by Johnson & Johnson coming out in the first week after the newspaper approached them, what were they saying to the public? They were saying to the public, forgive us. We offer a product to you that the cap on those bottles was not safe for the general public. And we're going to deal with it. We're going to find a solution, and we're going to do it quickly. Johnson & Johnson also used remediation and rectification. Both of those are forgiveness strategies in the Tylenol crisis. Remediation offers some form of compensation to help victims of the crisis. And Johnson & Johnson provided the victims' families counseling and financial assistance, even though they were not responsible for the product tampering. Negative feelings by the general public against Johnson & Johnson were lessened as the media showed them take positive actions to help the victims' families. And you notice when there are other crises around the world today, don't you notice that's one of the things you see a lot of companies do? Remediation, where they address the victims' families. Then there's rectification, and that involves taking action to prevent a recurrence of the crisis in the future. And Johnson & Johnson did that by the triple sealing packaging on those bottles. They also developed a new random inspection procedures before the shipment of Tylenol to retailers. Sympathy, that's also a strategy, and that was big in Johnson & Johnson's crisis communication. Sympathy strategy wins support from the public by portraying the organization as the unfair victim of an attack from an outside entity. And Johnson & Johnson's willingness to accept losses by pulling the Tylenol product developed sympathy with the public because they pulled them all off the shelf. So Johnson & Johnson Tylenol crisis is an example of how an organization should communicate with the various public during a crisis. The organization's leadership set the example from the beginning by making public safety the organization's #1 concern. And this is particularly important given the fact that Johnson & Johnson's main mission with Tylenol is to enhance the public's well-being or health. So although Johnson & Johnson's leadership performed superbly during the crisis, there were some important areas Tylenol improved upon after the crisis. Johnson & Johnson did not have a proactive public affairs program before the crisis. Because remember, they came together and they formed a 7-man strategy crisis team. The only media relations engaged in by Johnson & Johnson was in advertising and marketing. And that's how most companies are. They would have a marketing department that includes advertising. So in the early stages of the crisis, Tylenol was informed about what was going on from a Chicago reporter. And in particular, the reporter had been more contentious or adversarial. The whole crisis may have taken on a different form in the public's perception. Because remember now, the reporter was trying to find out information from Johnson & Johnson, not knowing that Johnson & Johnson knew nothing about the crisis. So Johnson & Johnson's failure to employ or establish a positive relationship with the media, a key stakeholder, forced the company to respond to the crisis in an advertising-like manner because that's all that they knew. Johnson & Johnson received criticism from the media for not being genuine due to the slick sales-like response ads ran during the crisis. The personal messages with the media from the CEO of the organization enabled Johnson & Johnson to overcome this problem. Again, using those strategies of sympathy, forgiveness, rectification, remediation. So today, Johnson & Johnson has completely recovered its market share lost during the crisis. The organization was able to reestablish the Tylenol brand name as one of the most trusted over-the-counter consumer products in America. Johnson & Johnson handling of the Tylenol crisis is clearly the example other companies should follow if they find themselves on the brink of losing everything. Any comments? Everyone remember this crisis, right? Yes?
No, no comments, sorry.
But you remember the crisis?
Yes, I do.
Okay. All right. So you understand now, if you're in an organization, any organization here in the Bahamas, reputation is key. And it's how you handle
Yeah,
crisis, is how you try to maintain or salvage your reputation.
yeah. The response time is what was very important for them as well. I was very well impressed. They really acted quickly, promptly.
Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
And and the strategy that they use is what others follow today. So what is reputation? In a sense, a company's reputation is the ultimate intangible. It's literally nothing more than how the organization is perceived by a variety of people. It is slippery, it is volatile, it is easily compromised, it is impossible to control, and it's amorphous, always changing. Reputation is hard to pin down in monetary terms, despite the fact that damage ultimately carries a cost. It makes reputation risk a particularly challenge to internal auditors and risk managers. Because you could have a good reputation this morning, and by this afternoon, that reputation could be dwindling down. Reputation is not synonymous with brand, goodwill, or image. A brand is a consumer proposition created and managed by its owner in order to generate revenue. A reputation is a perception held by others about the company in anticipation of future behavior. Goodwill is an accounting term for the intangible value of customer loyalty. Image is a one-dimensional mental picture without the future or historic element present in reputation. So in some cases, business consider their reputation with shareholders or investors to be the most critical after investor confidence, which refers to market capitalization and share price. But you should also consider customers, suppliers, employees. They are all important because a business cannot exist without them. A business may have more than one reputation. The reputation could be good, a reputation could be bad. And this poses to the board of directors certain strategic questions. Is reputation with one group more important than the other? Should the business take notice of all stakeholders' concerns? And should the business prioritize? So to a business, reputation is attributed for some action or behavioral characteristic that sets the company apart from competitors or peers. For investors, it could be for delivery of dividends as promised. For customers, it could be delivery of value for money. And employees, it could be having a good pension plan. Reputation management is about managing expectation and avoiding surprises, which draws attention to performance above or below expectation. Reputation is a relative concept and reflects the environment in which we operate as much as our own actions. Alternatively, reputation can be seen as being based on perception. It doesn't have to rely on truth or reality, but on a combination of the experience, knowledge, and belief of stakeholders. A company has the capacity to improve a stakeholder experience and some ability to improve stakeholder knowledge, but little power to influence belief. It is a stakeholder group believes your company is fraudulent, there is very little you can do to dissuade it. A good reputation is not easily won and commonly hard earned. A bad reputation can attach itself quickly and prove very difficult to correct. Building a good reputation is not something a business does consciously, as a good reputation is a byproduct of good management. Organizations that acquire a good reputation do so because they are managing the issues which are business critical, not necessarily reputation critical. Basically, when a business looks at its reputation, it is seen as a valuable endorsement of trust by its stakeholders. When stakeholders become disillusioned, this causes damage to a business reputation. The stakeholders' value judgment fails, confidence is eroded. And business reputation is rarely measured. It usually shows up as the gap between book value and market capitalization. It is a part of the intellectual capital of a business, as it has a huge value in attracting new clients, employees, and investors. So if you think about it, think about a place of employment. Let's find one that's normally, I'm trying to think of an organization. Okay, let's take Commonwealth Brewery. What do you think its reputation is? Versus, what's the other brewery called? Jimmy's Wine and Spirit. And then there's another one. We have about 4 or 5 breweries now. What do you think Commonwealth Brewery's reputation is? Being mindful that is on BizX. Any thoughts?
I haven't heard of any incidents, so I would assume that it is relatively sound.
Yes. There's not had any crisis. There's been no tampering of the bottle, no mixtures that made people sick. And these are the key things. And that's why they say reputation is something, you can't measure it.
Mm-hmm.
People trust your product. You can imagine if someone were to get a sans beer, passion fruit, start vomiting. Someone else at another on fish fry buys the same beer, starts vomiting. Mm-hmm. You can imagine what happens to the reputation of that beer. And the crisis management that they have to be in order to maintain that reputation, to start to build it back up. Because first they have to take them all off the shelves.
Yeah.
Then they have to build that confidence back. And you know just how Bahamians go. Mm-hmm. With a wrong passion fruit, something wrong with the rest. We don't want none.
No, and then they go to head nose.
Right. So they're going to sit on the shelf until they expire. Mm-hmm. And especially if they say persons had to be hospitalized, mm-hmm. They're not going, the reputation goes right down. And it's key how you answer. And notice what you said about Tylenol. Most companies have a marketing department. Yeah. That is not the same as dealing with a crisis. Because you can't give a marketing response to a crisis.
True.
So reputation versus image. Reputation is corporate actions and conduct that create trust as experienced by different stakeholders. It serves as a reservoir of goodwill in times of crisis. It's what you are and not what you want to be, because it's how people perceive you now. Image is belief in and a personal evaluation of a firm or brand. That's a person's belief. And it's tied to the firm or the brand directly, not to the firm's action. The correlation between reputation and image: if image is positive, reputation may improve. If reputation is positive, image will improve. Reputation evolves more slowly than image because reputation is tied to actions. Reputation versus brand. What differentiates the business from its competitors? Marketing of the company, including advertising and publicity. It refers to logo and names of companies, how we present ourselves, what we create. That's what a brand is. Reputation cannot be enhanced by just a name change. Larger concept, as it includes other elements, is often referred to as emotional capital of the firm. So if capital, it is subject to risk, and our status in the minds of others, what we earn. So reputation is earned. In an article written by Robert Scott and Roland, they say that regulators and industry groups and consultants and individual companies, they have ignored reputational risk because it's something that they can't define it. It can't be measured. And they say that is a problem. They say because so much market value comes from hard to access intangible assets like brand equity and intellectual capital. And organizations are especially vulnerable to anything that damages their reputation. Companies with strong positive reputations attract better talent. And that makes sense. Because if you have a good reputation, you will get top quality clients and top quality staff, and are perceived as providing more value in their products and services, which often allows them to charge a premium. And you notice when some organizations recruit persons at certain level, it's advertised in the newspaper because that builds your reputation. Their customers are more loyal and buy broader ranges of products and services. Since the market believes that such companies will deliver sustained earnings and future growth, they have higher price earnings multiples and market values and lower costs of capital. Most companies do an inadequate job of managing their reputation in general, and the risk to their reputation in particular. They tend to focus their energies on handling the threats to their reputation that have already surfaced. That is not risk management. It is crisis management, a reactive approach aimed at limiting the damage. They introduce 3 factors that affect the level of such risk, and then they give you several ways to sufficiently quantify and control those factors. Executives know the importance of their company's reputation. Firms with strong positive reputation attract better people. They are perceived as providing more value, which often allows them to charge a premium. Their customers are more loyal and buy broader ranges of products and services. Because the market believes that such companies will deliver sustained earnings and future growth, they have higher price earnings multiples and market values and lower costs of capital. In the economy, or in an economy where 70 to 80% of market value comes from hard to assess intangible assets, such as brand, equity, intellectual capital, and goodwill, organizations are especially vulnerable to anything that damages their reputation. So even sophisticated companies have only a fuzzy idea of how to manage reputational risk. A large US pharmaceutical company reflects the current state of practice among well-run organizations. It has an enterprise risk management system for managing operational and financial risk, as well as hazards from external events such as natural disasters. The firm's vice president of risk management oversees the system. However, the company manages reputational risk only informally and unevenly at the local and product levels. Its leaders consider reputational risk only when they make major decisions, such as those involving acquisitions. The risk management of VP says that reputational risk is not included in the long list of risks for which he is responsible. So then who is responsible? the CEO, the vice president surmises, since that is who oversees the firm's elaborate crisis response system and is ultimately responsible for dealing with any event that could damage the company's reputation. And this pharmaceutical firm is not alone. Contingency plans for crisis management are as close as most large and mid-sized companies come to reputational risk management. While some plans are important, it is a mistake to confuse them with the capability for managing reputational risk. So there are three things which determine the extent to which a company is exposed to reputational risk. One is the reputation reality gap. The second one is changing beliefs and expectations. And the third one is weak internal coordination. Managing reputational risk begins with recognizing that reputation is a matter of perception. A company's overall reputation is a function of its reputation amongst its various stakeholders. The stakeholders are investors, customers, suppliers, employees, regulators, politicians, NGOs, the communities in which the firm operates. In specific categories, product quality, corporate governance, employee relations, customer service, intellectual capital, financial performance, handling of environmental and social issues. A strong positive reputation among stakeholders across multiple categories will result in a strong positive reputation for the company overall. And that's why you see a lot of organizations today, when they're doing their enterprise risk management or their enterprise risk assessment, they are always cognizant of who their stakeholders are, because the stakeholders is what help to build that reputation. So reputation is distinct from the actual character or behavior of the company and may be better or worse. When reputation of a company is more positive than its underlying reality, this gap poses a substantial risk. Eventually, the failure of a firm to live up to its billing will be revealed, and its reputation will decline until it more closely matches the reality. And then I gave you a little short example of BP. Because BP has had a lot of crisis with oil spills. To bridge reputation reality gaps, a company must either improve its ability to meet expectation or reduce expectations by promising less. The problem is managers may resort to short-term manipulations. For example, reputation reality gaps concerning financial performance often result in accounting fraud and ultimately restatements of results. And I know you remember many of these when they had all of these corporate scandals: Computer Associates, Enron, Rite Aid, Tyco, WorldCom, Xerox. All of these are incidents where the reputation of the organization went down. This is reputation versus reality. Organizations that actually meet the expectations of their various stakeholders may not get full credit for doing so. And this occurs when a company's reputation has been significantly damaged by unfair attacks from special interest groups or inaccurate reporting by media. It also can happen when a company has made genuine strides in addressing a problem that has hurt its reputation, but can convince stakeholders that its progress is real. And this happened in Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors. Remember, even though they improved their cars so much that the quality gap between them and the vehicles made by Japanese companies had largely closed by 2001, yet much of the frustration of the big three consumers remained skeptical. So undeserved, poor, or mediocre reputations can be maddening. The temptation is to respond to them with resignation and conclude, no matter what we do, people won't like us, so why bother? The reason executives should bother is that their fiduciary obligation to close such reputation reality gaps is as great as their obligation to improve real performance. Both things drive value creation for shareholders. The second is changing beliefs and expectations. This is another determinant of reputational risk. The changing beliefs and expectations of stakeholders are another major determinant of reputational risk. When expectations are shifting and the company's character stays the same, the reputation reality gap widens and risk increase. There are numerous examples of once acceptable practices that stakeholders no longer consider to be satisfactory or ethical. And then I give you the example of the hostile takeover in Japan, where almost unheard of, but was partly due to the cross-holding of shares among the elite groups of companies known as keiretsu, a practice that undermined the power of other shareholders. Sometimes norms evolve over time, as did the now widespread expectations in most developed countries that companies should pollute minimally, if at all. A change in the behavior of policies, or policies of a leading company can cause stakeholders' expectations to shift quite rapidly, and which can imperil the reputations of companies that adhere to old standards. For example, the Eco-Imagination initiative launched by GE in 2005 has the potential to raise the bar for other companies. It committed GE to doubling its research and development investment in developing cleaner technologies, doubling the revenue from products and services that have significant and measurable environmental benefits, and reducing GE's own greenhouse emissions. Of course, different stakeholders' expectations can diverge dramatically, which makes the task of determining acceptable norms especially difficult. When GlaxoSmithKline pioneered the development of an antiretroviral drug to combat AIDS, its reputation for conducting cutting-edge research and product development was reinforced, and shareholders were pleased because that'll drive up shares, the prices of shares. They were initially on board when GSK led a group of pharmaceutical companies in suing the South African government after it passed legislation in 1997, allowing the country to import less expensive generic version of AIDS drugs covered by GSK patents. But in 2001, GSK shareholders did an about-face in reaction to an intensifying campaign waged by NGOs and to the trial proceedings, which made GSK and the other drug companies look greedy and immoral. With its reputation plunging, GSK relented and granted a South African company a free license to manufacture generic versions of its AIDS drugs, but the damage was already done. So sometimes particular events can cause latent concerns to burst to the surface. And one example would be all the questions about whether Merck had fully disclosed the potential of its painkiller Vioxx to cause heart attacks and strokes. Merck is embroiled in thousands of lawsuits over that writer's drug, which it pulled from the market in 2004. The controversy has raised patients' and doctors' expectations that drug companies should disclose more detailed results and analysis of clinical trials, as well as experience in the market after drugs have received regulatory approval. They either ignored signs that stakeholders' beliefs and expectations were changing or denied their validity. Organizations sometimes underestimate how much attitudes can vary by region or country. For example, Monsanto, a developer of genetically modified plants, was badly burned by its failure to anticipate Europeans' deep concerns about genetically modified foods. So that's why you see when a company is entering a new market, they would actually do surveys because they have to test the attitude of the consumers before they enter into the market. The third is weak internal coordination. If one group creates expectations that another group fails to meet, the company's reputation can suffer. An example is the marketing department of a software company that launches a large advertising campaign for a new product before developers have identified and ironed out all the bugs. The company is forced to choose between selling a flawed product and introducing it later than promised. The timing of unrelated decisions can also put a company's reputation at risk, especially if it causes a stakeholder group to jump to a negative conclusion. Poor internal coordination also inhibits a company's ability to identify changing beliefs and expectations. In virtually all well-run organizations, individual functional groups not only have their fingers on the pulses of various stakeholders, but are also actively trying to manage their expectations. Coordination is often poor because the CEO has not assigned this responsibility to a specific person. Remember earlier, when organizations were asked who should be responsible for reputation risk, their response is, it should be the CEO. So when 269 executives were asked in 2005 by the Economist Intelligence Unit, who at their companies had major responsibility for managing reputational risk, 84% responded the CEO. This means that nobody is really overseeing the coordination process. Yes, the CEO is the person ultimately responsible for reputational risk, since he or she is ultimately responsible for everything. But the fact of the matter is, the CEO does not have the time to manage the ongoing process of coordinating all the activities that affect reputational risk. So how do you effectively manage reputational risk? There are 5 steps. 1 is assessing your company's reputation among the stakeholders. The second is evaluating your company's real character. The third is trying to close that reputation reality gap. The fourth is monitoring the changing beliefs and expectations. And fifth is putting a senior executive below the CEO in charge of reputation risk. So how do you assess reputation? Reputation is perception, and it is perception that must be measured. So there are 3 questions that need to be addressed. What is the company's reputation in each area? Product quality, financial performance, and so on. Why? How do these reputations compare with those of the firm's peers? Various techniques exist for evaluating a company's reputation. They include media analysis, surveys of stakeholders, industry executives, focus groups, and public opinion polls. Although all are useful, a detailed and structured analysis of what the media are saying is especially important because the media shape the perceptions and expectations of all stakeholders. Many companies today hire clipping services to gather stories about them. Text and speech recognition technologies enable these services to scan a wide range of outlets, including newspapers, magazines, TV, radio, and blogs. They can provide information on such things as the total number of stories, the number per topic, and the source and author of each story. So the old tool of clipping services needs to be supplemental with strategic media intelligence. This new tool not only analyzes every line in a story, but also places the coverage of a company within the context of all the stories in the leading media, sets the tone for the coverage of topics, companies, and people in individual countries. So since the reputation of a company is a function of others, reputation in its industry, and the relative reputation of the industry overall, having the complete context is essential for assuming volume and prominence of coverage, topics of interest, and whether the view is negative or positive. Establishing a positive reputation through the media depends on several factors or practices, according to research. First, the company has to land and remain on the public's radar screen, which involves staying above what we call the awareness threshold. A minimum number of stories mentioning or featuring the company in the leading media. Second, a positive reputation requires that at least 20% of the stories in the leading media be positive, no more than 10% negative, and the rest neutral. A company's reputation is also vulnerable if the media focus on just a few topics, such as earnings and the personality of the CEO. Even if the coverage of these topics is extremely favorable, a negative event outside these areas will have as much larger negative impact than it would have if the firm had enjoyed broader positive coverage. Third, managers can influence the mix of positive, negative, and neutral stories by striving to optimize the company's share of voice, the percentage of leading media stories, mentioning the firm that quotes someone from the organization or cite data it has provided. Evaluate reality. The company must objectively evaluate its ability to meet the performance expectations of stakeholders. The true character is difficult sometimes to gauge for three reasons. First, managers have a natural tendency to overestimate their organizations and their own capabilities. Executives tend to believe that their company has a good reputation if there is no indication that it is bad. And finally, expectations get managed. Sometimes they are set low in order to ensure that performance objectives will be achieved. And other times they are set optimistically high in an attempt to impress superiors or the market. So just as the reputation of a company must be assessed relative to competitors, so must its reality. The importance of benchmarking financial and stock performance and processes against peers and those of companies regarded as best in class is hardly a revelation. However, the degree of sophistication and detail, as well as the accuracy or reliability of benchmarking data, can vary enormously. So when a company's character exceeds its reputation, the gap can be closed with a more effective investor relations and corporate communications program that employs the principles of strategic media intelligence, as discussed earlier. If a reputation is unjustifiably positive, the company must either improve its capabilities, behavior, and performance, or moderate stakeholders' perceptions. Understanding exactly how beliefs and expectations are evolving is not easy, but there are ways to develop a picture over time. For instance, regular surveys of employees, customers, and other stakeholders can reveal whether their priorities are changing. While most well-run companies conduct such surveys, few take the additional steps of considering whether the data subject that a gap between reputation and reality is materializing or widening. Influential NGOs that can make the company a target are one group of stakeholders that should be monitored. These include environmental activists, groups concerned about wages, working conditions, and labor practices, consumers' rights of groups, globalization foes, animal rights groups, climate change groups. Interviews with them can also be a good way of identifying issues that may not yet have appeared on the company's radar screen. Finally, companies need to understand how the media shape the public's beliefs and expectations. Dramatic changes in the amount of coverage influence how fast and to what extent beliefs and expectations change. The large volumes and prominent displays of stories on the backdating of stock options in recent months is one example of how the media can help set the agenda. And of course, you have to put one person in charge. The CEO has to give one person responsibility for making these things happen. That is assessing reputation, evaluating reality, identifying and closing gaps, and monitoring changing beliefs and expectations. Obvious candidates are the COO, the CFO, the heads of risk management, strategic planning, and internal audit. They have the credibility and control some of the resources necessary to do the job. In general, those whose existing responsibilities pose potential conflicts probably shouldn't be chosen. People holding top spin jobs, such as heads of marketing and corporate communications, fall into this category. So does the general counsel, whose job of defending the company means his relationship with stakeholders is often adversarial and whose typical response to media inquiries is no comment. So the chosen executive should periodically report to top management and the board on what the key reputational risks are and how they are being managed. It is up to the CEO or the board to decide whether the risks are acceptable, and if not, what action should be taken. Top management and the board should periodically review the risk management process and make suggestions for improving it. Regardless of size and industry, it is imperative for organizations to manage their reputation carefully. Just as strong reputation can help attract new business, a poor reputation can drive potential customers away, leading to financial loss. And this is why many organizations are beginning to invest in reputational risk management programs. Any comments so far?
No, ma'am.
No comments.
Okay, so reputational risk monitoring. With a system in place to manage enterprise risk, companies are able to set quantifiable performance metrics and facilitate reputational alignment across departments. And this streamlines a business ability to identify and respond to reputational threats by enabling risk prioritization. There are 4 best practices you can follow to effectively manage reputational risk in an organization. One is, of course, to establish board oversight. Effective risk management requires ongoing board oversight, and the goal is to create a system that allows for constant communication between risk management team and the board so that stakeholders are always aware of security efforts. The board can also provide valuable insight into which risk to prioritize based on their knowledge of organizational goals and procedures. Second, integrating your reputational risk management strategy with core business processes ensures that it is factored into business planning. In order to get the most out of these risk management strategies, it is important that directors and executives understand the different aspects of your plan of action so that they can devote the necessary resources to risk management teams. Third, while risk management programs help limit reputational risk exposure, no strategy is ever 100% effective. In the event that you do not encounter an event that poses risk to your organization's reputation, it is essential that you have an incident response plan in place. An incident response plan is a predetermined set of actions that an organization follows in order to mitigate the overall impact of events that could have adverse effects on reputation. And fourth is ensure third-party risk management. So it's critical that you manage the risk as you would your own. Vendors have access to critical systems and customer data, which must be carefully monitored as to avoid any potential risk events. Taking a risk-based approach to vendor management can not only help, but limit potential reputational risk events associated with third parties. Some key vendor risks are cybersecurity risk, compliance risk, financial risk, and strategic risk. So remember I said earlier that reputational risk and the team itself must work closely with the board. And when you work closely with the board, that's dealing with corporate governance. So reputation risk is emerging as a key risk as companies focus on enterprise risk management. So why corporate governance? Why focus on corporate governance? Or why the new renewed quest for a set of rules to direct how we operate business on a daily business nowadays? And the answer to these questions seem to be tied to the fact that as a society, we appear to have lost our way, our moral compass, our sense of right and wrong. Issues that were once black and white have become gray. So what has reputation to do with governance? One of the primary causes of the loss of reputation in the business world is poor governance. Poor governance can easily destroy the reputation of a business and the personal reputations of board members and management. There are many cases of boardroom casualties and damaged personal reputations. For example, Marks and Spencer, BCCI, Hollinger, and Equitable Life is just a few. Most corporate governance disasters happen because the non-executives become too close or blindly trust the executive management team. So we're going to talk about corporate governance itself, the board, and also non-executives in other classes. So the link between corporate governance and reputational risk in the wake of the corporate collapses and lapses in leadership, it's become very clear that there is a strong link between reputation, governance, and risk. Risk needs to be given a higher profile at board level, and directors and top management need to be aware that it is their responsibility to be alert to new and emerging risk, particularly reputational risk. So good governance should facilitate efficient, effective, and entrepreneurial management that can deliver shareholder value over the longer term within appropriate risk parameters. So for those of you who have done governance, risk, and compliance, you now see that reputational risk is a part of good governance. Then I give you some examples of reputational risk in recent years. And these, you can find all of these online. And they give you a good idea of reputational risk. And when you don't manage it properly, looking at when you read each one of them, you can identify who are the stakeholders and how their perception of the company impacted their reputation. So I give you Mercedes, there's WorldCom, there's Enron, there's Tyco, there's Rite Aid, and there are other cases, all of which are online. So one of the key things about stakeholders of reputational risk is you must know the stakeholders. And we've already listed all of the stakeholders. So that's something that you need to know. And when you're looking at corporate governance and how the board is managing its reputational risk, you have to be able to identify who are its stakeholders. So what really drives reputation? Reputation has some value drivers. You're looking at the human capital talent, the culture. You're looking at the corporate ethical values. Next, you're looking at external factors, the pressure groups, environmental responsibilities. And we spoke about those already, the NGOs. You're looking at client service and new services. So you're looking at products, doing risk assessment of products and looking at pricing. And looking at long-term financial performance. And you're looking at corporate governance, that is regulatory compliance. So reputation drivers create value to the firm. A good reputation encourages consumers to buy products and services. Suppliers are willing to do business with you, thus expanding opportunities. Top-notch employees want to join and stay with your organization, thus enhancing its innovation capabilities and value. Favorable outlook from regulators and rating industries, thus decreasing financing costs and increasing value. Investors want to hold shares, thus increasing value. Positive feedback from media and pressure groups increase value. And in a crisis mode, the investors give the company the benefit of the doubt, thus easing short-term decrease in values. So what are the benefits of having an effective reputation management? It improves relations with shareholders. It creates a more favorable environment for investment. It recruits or retains the best employees. It reduces barriers to development in new markets. It secures premium prices for products, and it minimizes the threat of litigation. So all crises are unique, but they all share the same traits: the element of surprise, insufficient information, quick pace of events, intense scrutiny. And there are some key steps, strategic steps in response to a crisis. You have to be able to define that situation, set your objectives, develop some measures, organize your response process, and deliver a response. And you have to do those in a very short period of time. Successful reputation management involves identifying key stakeholders and understanding them and those who influence them. And this involves identifying the issues that need managing and the opportunities for getting news and information to the right audiences. So managing issues is often about closing the gaps between stakeholder awareness and actual performance. Managing stakeholders' expectations by nurturing and promoting the association's strengths and identifying, addressing, and managing weaknesses. The key is to organize and define the issues before they impact and to take positive plan action to diffuse them rather than having to react hurriedly and defensively. So to avoid being taken by surprise, organizations should scan, monitor, and track potentially influential external forces. They should analyze those forces in terms of their effects on an organization's image, financial performance, and ability to deliver. Based on that analysis, an organization can develop and implement a strategy for managing its reputation. To monitor, report, and review reputation and reputation risk, any organization needs to analyze and understand the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of and to its reputation. Now, I gave you a checklist for mitigating reputational risk. You must have a clear and well-communicated business vision, values, and strategy that set the right ethical and stakeholder awareness tone for the business. You should have supporting policies and code of conduct that guide employee behavior and decision-making so that goals are achieved in accordance with business values. You should have extension of the business values and relevant policies to key partners in the supply chain. Dialogue and engagement to track the changing perceptions, requirements, and expectations of major stakeholders continuously. You notice that's one of the gaps here in most of the companies. They don't do surveys. They don't check to see what are their stakeholders' perception of the organization. And that's why a lot of them do not, I guess they underperform, or they wonder why they slowly just become like non-existent. People don't come to their stores anymore because they think that because they carry the brands of certain goods that they will always have customers, but it doesn't work that way because your reputation is key. You remember the store, Jonas George in Palmdale?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so were they selling anything different from Kelly's, anything different from AID?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so again, it depends on what? Your reputation. And are you giving your stakeholders what they're looking for? An effective enterprise-wide risk management system that identifies, assesses, responds to, monitors, and reports on threats and opportunities to reputation. So at the time when they were closing, Palmdale itself as a business area was dying down. So what they should have done was move to the area where the traffic had moved to. A culture in which employees are risk aware, are encouraged to be vigilant, raise concerns, highlight opportunities, and act as reputational ambassadors for the business. And that's why it's key to always listen to your stakeholders. Transparent communications that meet stakeholders' needs and build trust and confidence. So sometimes these organizations are going through a very difficult time. They don't conduct surveys. They don't reach out to their stakeholders to find out what exactly are we doing wrong? What can we change? You should have a robust and well-rehearsed crisis management arrangement. Specific risk. Evaluate the risk in a usual way by considering the likelihood of the risk occurring and the impact if it does. Identify the key stakeholders, understand them and what they regard as current and emerging major issues. Also, what do they expect of us? Quantify the risk in monetary terms. For example, expected reduced income resulting from loss of customers or impact on share price. Develop and document a response plan to manage the specific risk that presents unacceptable exposure for the business. Identify possible gaps between customer experience and expectations and our values and delivery. Regularly measure external perceptions of the company. You see what it says? Regularly measure. You notice that when you go to the food store in Harbor Bay, what's that one called? The
Solomon's Fresh Market.
Yes. Every time you get a receipt, what do the cashier says? She highlights the bottom of the receipt and says, please take our survey. And the survey is on what? Their image. Their brands. And lastly, your perception of the company. It says regularly measure external perceptions of the company. And they do that on every receipt. Systematically track reputational threats. Train employees to identify and manage the specific reputational risk. Publicly set standards on environmental, human rights, and labor practices. And establish relationships and trust with pressure groups and other potential critics. So you need to ask the following questions. They may also help to uncover reputation risk. What newspaper headline about your business would you least or most like to see? What could trigger this? What could threaten your core business values or your license to operate? Such risk can seriously damage reputation and lead to an irreversible loss of stakeholder confidence. Could there be collateral risk arising from the activities of another player in your sector? If so, the reputation of your own business may be vulnerable and come under intense stakeholder scrutiny. That one there, when you talk about could there be collateral risk arising from the activities of another player in your sector, think about the domestic banking sector. If one bank is experiencing withdrawals, what do you think the other banks are going to do? You have to move into crisis management. Because if there's a run on one bank, what does that mean? Based on the rumor, there could be a run on other banks. Could reputation risk exposure arise from an acquisition, merger, or other portfolio change? A mismatch of values, ethos, culture, and standards resulting in inappropriate behavior could seriously damage reputation. Conversely, if the acquisition target enjoys a superior reputation, it could provide a competitive edge. So again, who is responsible? The board. They are the ultimate custodian of a business's reputation. Managing reputation risk successfully requires a team effort across the business from executive and non-executive directors, senior and middle managers, public relations staff, risk and audit professionals, and key business partners. Everyone employed by and indirectly working for a business should be expected to uphold the business's values and bear some responsibility for spotting emerging risks that could impact reputation. The telltale signs of an imminent crisis are often missed because personnel are not risk aware. A spate of customer complaints, safety near misses, or supplier non-conformances, a sudden rise in employee turnover, or pressure group activity, these can act as crucial early warning indicators which allow a business to take corrective action and avert disaster. So concluding on reputation risk, a good reputation hinges on a business living the values it claims to espouse and delivering consistently on the promise to its stakeholders. Successfully managing reputation risk is both an inside and an outside challenge. The inside component requires business leaders to establish an appropriate vision, values, and strategic goals that will guide actions and behaviors throughout the organization. Active and systematic management of the risk to reputation can help to ensure that perception is aligned with reality and that stakeholder experience matches expectations. So you can see out of all the risks that you have studied, reputation risk is key for the survival of an organization. Because you can have credit risk and you can monitor credit risk. You can put measures in place. You could have the same thing when it comes to liquidity risk, matching up your assets in your book with your liabilities. But when it comes to reputational risk, you're dependent on all of your stakeholders, all of them. And it's something that the board, through good corporate governance, must monitor. It has to manage it, and you can only do that by interacting with your stakeholders. Any comments?
No comments.
No comments, no questions? None?
No, honestly, you're doing like such a great job. Like I'm receiving a lot. So it's really like refreshing to actually hear it broken down this way. So I'm just taking my notes and I'm understanding what you're saying.
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
all right.
I concur.
Okay, because I try to break it down as much as I can so you can apply it. You're not just reading it, but you can apply it in what you do in terms of risk management. And I try to give you as much information. So at the end of the course, if you were being on a team, you'll be able to understand what risk management is all about and how you'll be able to add value to the team. So do you want me tonight to go into ethics, or you want me to do ethics and corporate governance together? And then I'll do for the third class, executives and disclosure. How's that?
That's fine. We can do ethics and corporate governance together.
Okay. And then on the last class, we will do executives and disclosure.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So I think I've given you a good idea of reputation risk, being a part of enterprise risk, and how important it is for an organization through good corporate governance of its board in managing reputation risk. All right.
Thank you so much.
Most welcome, and I will
Yes, thank you.
same time.
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
All right. Enjoy the rest
All
of your evening.
you
You
too.
too. Good
You
All
night.
right.
too. Bye.